California Governor Gavin Newsom has claimed that a US president from the Democratic Party would rejoin the Paris climate agreement without hesitation. He was speaking at the COP30 climate summit in Brazil, which is not being attended by a delegation from the US government. Mr. Newsom's widely seen as a frontrunner for the Democratic candidacy in the 2028 presidential election. This year's COP comes against a background of recent disasters linked to global warming. Many leaders are calling for less talk and more action. Host nation Brazil wants to take the global lead in combating climate change, but many have pointed to issues with Brazil's own track record on the environment.
A renewables powerhouse and host of this year's top global climate event, but also planning to drill the Amazon River for oil. Brazil is now at the center of climate contradictions. President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva has promised to end illegal deforestation by 2030, and last year, according to government data, overall deforestation rates dropped by more than 30%, a major turnaround. But the region is facing ever-worsening challenges. Fueled by the worst drought in 70 years, wildfires swept across the tropical regions of the country, and primary rainforest loss more than doubled in 2024 compared to the year before. It's a new kind of destruction. Not chainsaws, but fire wiping out old-growth forests that sequester carbon, house biodiversity, and provide a defense against climate change. Brazil gets more than 80% of its electricity from renewables, mostly hydropower, a clean energy leader. But it recently approved new oil exploration licenses at the mouth of the Amazon.
Even though we're not burning this oil, we are selling the oil for someone else to burn. Therefore, we are contributing to climate change by expanding our oil production.
The government argues the profits from future exports could help finance its green transition.
It was decided that rich countries will lead the race for decommissioning and reducing CO2 emissions from fossil fuel use, both producers and consumers, with developing countries following afterward.
After years of rising deforestation, especially under Bolsonaro, Lula's first 2 years flipped the trend, thanks in large part to tougher enforcement and indigenous protections. But the fires, along with political pressure from agribusiness, continue to test those gains. At COP30, Brazil plans to launch a global fund to pay nations for keeping tropical rainforests standing, an attempt to make trees worth more alive than cut down. A radical move from a country still balancing between oil and oxygen.
Let's take a closer look at this with our climate reporter, Beatrice Christofaro. Welcome, Beatrice. So we see Brazil trying to position itself as a leader on climate action, but also expanding fossil fuel projects. So how is the government defending this apparent contradiction?
It's using two main arguments. One of them is that it will actually use the revenue from this oil that it's taking from these untapped sources to fund its green transition. So, for example, they say it's kind of a surefire way to get money into the coffers of a developing nation that then they can use for things like restoring the Amazon. You know, whether this will actually happen is debatable, and it's a huge issue, a contentious issue in Brazil that lots of people are fighting about. And the other argument, we kind of heard it from Environment Minister Marina Silva just now, is that rich nations who have a history of emitting greenhouse gases, they should be the ones to go first, and that developing nations like Brazil can follow suit afterwards.
And tell us more about the thinking behind that and how they're going to persuade the richer countries to do that.
So yeah, the argument they're using, it's not just Brazil, it's all developing nations. They're saying, look, the rich nations, they made lots and lots of money. They built up their money. They built up their economy by emitting fossil fuels by emitting greenhouse gases for decades. And now they're saying, now that it's our turn to profit, are you really saying that we have to transition away now, especially as rich countries like the US, Australia, Norway, they're also exploring for fossil fuels. So why do we have to stop? But of course, there is kind of a greater understanding that all countries will suffer the more we emit, especially vulnerable nations. So it is in their interest to also stop. And what was decided at the COP in Dubai 2 years ago is that countries will, transition away from fossil fuels, and that this has to happen in a just and orderly manner. And the way that developing nations are interpreting this is, order. Rich nations go first, you have a higher responsibility, and we will follow suit once you've done that.
Okay, so is that just that this is what should happen, or is that are they trying to push this in any way? Is there an or else?
This is always the core at every argument at the COP. It really kind of boils down to this.
Please do it.
Yeah, just do it, please. They don't really have any way to threaten them.
Aside from fossil fuels, what else is looking to be controversial at this COP?
So it always boils down to this tug of war between industrialized nations and developing nations. And so another issue that could come up is financing for climate adaptation. So that means, how do we adapt to the current climate, like our cities, our buildings, society, farming? That can look like, new drainage systems for heavy rainfall, cooling centers for heat waves.
Is that contentious?
No, so the financing is contentious.
Oh, right.
So
okay.
We all agree that we should.
Yes.
We know we need
Who's
it.
going to pay for it?
Exactly. The vulnerable nations are like, hi, again, we are the ones who are suffering the most, and it's because you guys emitted over decades and decades. So you need to pay up so we can fund all of these things. And since this is a COP of implementation, how do we actually implement all these things we've planned? That's probably going to be a huge discussion.
Fewer world leaders at this event than usual. The US delegation, well, that's not even at a national level. This is governors and mayors and that sort of thing. Is the lack of a White House presence likely to weaken this summit's impact?
Some diplomats have actually said that it's a relief to them that the U.S. decided not to send a delegation at all. Because if we look at the Trump administration right now, it's not only pulling back on climate action, but it's like actively asking for more fossil fuel use. So what some diplomats are saying is like, hey, it's actually easier not to have them there at all than to have a really, really powerful country that's holding these positions. And ultimately, I think some people have also talked about, hey, there's not been that many world leaders here this year. But what really matters is like the people who are at the negotiating table, and that's technical experts, diplomats, legal advisors. So they're the ones who can move the needle, and it doesn't matter as much what president or prime minister is there or not.
All right, thanks for talking us through that, Beatrice. Beatrice Christofaro is our climate reporter. Thank you so much.